Oh, it's legitimately harder than most of their own parents' lives in some ways, and maybe some of their grandparents' lives, but not before that. Because
Hmm.
before that's World War II, and before that's the Great Depression, and before that's World War One, and before that, like, we don't have to go very far back, and like we don't know how. Actually, before that, we don't know how to cure strep throat, and so like basic bacterial diseases are wiping people out. I tried to find out, how bad is it for Gen Z? Is it justified that they need to go, like, you know, full Boston Tea Party here? And the answer, and it's not Boston Tea Party though, because it's Bolsheviks, or Jacobins or whatever. And the answer is, it wouldn't be justified anyway. But even under those circumstances, it's like you're not grateful for the opportunities that you have, and you're therefore not capitalizing on them.
Friends, let us consider that acuity is the refined clarity of thought and perception which enables one to discern subtle truths.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Acuity Podcast, Politics and Culture. I'm the host, Lavranos, the CEO and Chief Litigator at Acuity Medical Law. With me always is my lovely, charming co-host, Amy Hamm, and we are so delighted today to have a conversation with James Lindsay. Now, Amy is going to introduce James and give you some of his accolades, but before we start, I just want to say, from a personal nature, I've had a chance to meet James twice now, both at ARC conferences. And beyond all of the things that he's very well known for and all the credit that he deserves in his academic work, he is one of the nicest guys ever. He is tremendously humble. He spends the time to have conversations with, fans, inquirers at these conferences. I've seen him navigate some really wonderful conversations with people who are, kind of awkward, intimidated when they talk to him. Nothing but the nicest things to say about the guy. So I hope and encourage all of you to follow his work, and you'll see all the reasons why you should do that. Follow him on X, Conceptual James, and check out his website that Amy's going to talk to you about now in a minute. But it's such a great pleasure to have you here with us, James.
Well, thanks. That's one of the best introductions I've ever had.
And it's not even done yet. So here we have James Lindsay. He's a prolific writer, speaker, thinker, and academic background in mathematics. He lives in Tennessee. He's also the founder of an organization called New Discourses, of which he playfully calls himself the chief anti-totalitarianism officer. So New Discourses has a catchphrase, which is pursuing the light of objective truth in subjective darkness. And I agree with Eris. James has done so much to shine a light on identity politics, wokeness, critical theory, postmodernism, neo-Marxism, or kind of whatever other term you might use to describe the toxic culture that has enveloped the West and its institutions, particularly in the last 15 years. I think James can be described as someone who's generous with his thoughts, engages with culture, ideas, and people in a manner that a lot of public intellectuals really don't do. And by which I mean that he does it with a sense of humor and without partisan allegiances. So both Eris and I have been following your work for years. We all recently ran into each other at ARC London, and then we reached out about this episode afterwards. We saw one of your post-ARC tweets, which we can pull up on the screen, and maybe we'll start our discussion there. You made this strong argument that what's currently wrong with the West is ingratitude and entitlement rather than a spiritual decline. Have you continued to reflect or build upon this idea in the weeks since we've left London?
Um, yeah. I mean, not explicit. I haven't sat down and like just tried to develop it, but I have been thinking a lot about the If you're going to scroll down to it, it's going to take you like 3 days. That was a long time ago. You're going to have to search for the word gratitude and find it
Yeah.
at the top. But yeah, so um, gratitude, I really do think this. Like, so I'll tell the story of how I came to this thought. I was sitting there in the opening sessions of ARC, and to be like, confession time, I don't go to most of the sessions of any conference that I go to. It's very rare that I go to a session or more than a few, because I'm usually stuck having those conversations that I got complimented on having with whoever I can kind of run into. And sometimes I catch them, but I went to the first couple. So you had the astronaut Victor Glover talks, and he's insanely inspiring, just like one of the greatest people I think I've ever. I got to meet him and talk to him some. He's just fantastic in like every regard. And then you had Alexander Solzhenitsyn's son go up and read this kind of like super anti-American, very, very like Russian thing about the West, and it's like its value system and not being appropriate for Russia and having all these flaws and holes. And then he plays a piano piece. He's a concert pianist by trade himself. This very lovely piano piece that was like a lament to the loss of the West, and the whole first like morning was about the decline of the West, and a lot of arc was very like spiritually oriented. So it was talking about like this spiritual sickness or spiritual malady, and all I could think was like, these people flew here on 787s. What are they talking about? Like, and like, what are you really? What you're laying there, flying 500 and what 0.9 Mach on your back on a lie flat seat in the front of a 787 after eating a gourmet meal and drinking $100 a bottle of champagne on an airplane. Perfect comfort and safety with a virtually zero accident record now. Staring at the LED lighting on the ceiling of the plane, thinking, "Is this all there is? Like, is that your problem?" And I thought, what's really at the bottom of the spiritual malady is that we're really ingrateful. We're not grateful for, like, in a sense, how amazing it is. I started going down the rabbit hole with it, and I think I wrote this in the post. It's like, I don't know anybody who, I mean, maybe a couple of Soviet dissidents or Cuban, like refugees, or maybe some people who were in Mao's Cultural Revolution. But I basically don't know anybody who has ever had to stop and think, do I need to boil my shoes so my kids have something to eat? Do I have to pick tree leaves so that we have food, which even though they're not really nourishing, there's something to fill our stomachs? Like, the default of life is like really hard. And I even like look out at the wildlife. I have all these birds and rabbits and things that jump around in my yard. And I'm like, those things are scrabbling to barely get enough to eat every day. You can tell by how skinny they are. And at any given second, bang, they're obliterated by a hawk, right? And it's like, we're not even grateful for the fact that this isn't part of our existence. And I thought, this is kind of why, in what condition would a human being start to look at the world and say, what we have available to us in the first world is not enough, therefore we need a socialist revolution so that we can have fundamentally different means of sustenance or whatever. And it's like, you have to be profoundly not grateful. And I start reading the critical theorists. I'm reading Horkheimer again the other day. He's the one who created the critical theory in an essay called Traditional Critical Theory back in 1937. And he's writing about how, he's fundamentally skeptical of the idea of better, because when you make things better, you're only making them better within the system, and you've never had a full qualitative change from one system to another. And I'm like, you can only believe this when you're not grateful for how much better things are than they used to be, right? And so there's this kind of sick utopianism that comes with a lack of gratitude. And I started to think, like, we're just not grateful for how good a lot is. And it was a real spiritual struggle at ARC because they didn't have any freaking air conditioning. And so I'm trying to be like, gratitude for the West and for civilization. And it's like, there's damn heat. No, this sucks. I'm sweating. And, but then, then they turned the air conditioning on the third day, which proved they could have done it all along. And so I'm not grateful for government mismanagement. And I think any Canadian can agree with me on that.
Yes, I think that it's... Go ahead, Amy. Go ahead.
Oh, what you're saying just reminded me of, there was this journalist, I think she was with the Globe and Mail about like 20 years ago was her heyday. Her name was Jan Wong, and she did this experiment, which was kind of brilliant and she ended up writing a book about it. And so she was sort of a well-off upper middle class woman, and she decided to take her family, I think she had 2 or 3 kids at the time, and put them on for a whole month, I believe it was, and say, this is my budget for the month. And it's like food stamps, sort of go to the food bank, low income. And then she talked about the drudgery every day and the comparative struggles that these families have when they're living on such a limited budget. But then her conclusion ultimately was that the level of stress and strife that she felt in her life was ultimately the same, because she did find that all of the family's needs were met, and regardless of sort of whatever struggles she had, she was capable of feeling just as bad in either situation. And it just put a newfound perspective upon her own struggles, and she sort of realized that she was very ungrateful, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not just because of ARC and having this reflection, but I've had this, thought for a while, and I've been trying to like, okay, some stuff sucks. How can I be grateful for what I do have? And it's just such a game changer to start thinking that way. Not in the way where you become complacent or even naive. Like, yeah, obviously, like I right now we're actually getting like something outside of our house fixed that needed to be fixed. It functioned, but it wasn't great, right? And it needed repair, and I could have been and could be grateful that I had this, walkway that had these issues, and at the same time also desire to improve it, right? Like there's no saying that we can't do this better and be grateful for the step that we're at now or whatever. And so, I found it to be really kind of transformational. And then, I just mentioned Horkheimer, and I said that, well, what they really want is a qualitative change in the conditions. And a lot of people don't even realize like where that comes from. You hear that phrase from kind of, far leftists a lot. We have to, if you listen to the smart, like the educated ones, they talk about a qualitative change in conditions, a qualitative change in conditions. And I don't know that that comes from something really messed up, which is Lenin's second dialectic, where it is a quantity is transformed into quality, and then quality will be transformed back into quantity. The thing is like no socialist program, they've all done the quantity transforming into quality part, sort of, but they haven't managed to get that to turn back into quantity. Like they've never figured out how to like make, the idea is like when it's a socialist thing, it's more fair, so it's better, so it's higher quality, right? Even though the stuff you have is actually really low quality under a socialist program. So you're taking abundance and transforming it into like moral, feel good about yourself because you're helping the world, and then it's supposed to magically transform back into quantity, and it never does. And this is like, again, the air conditioning is kind of perfect for this, because that's all predicated off of this weird green environmentalist degrowth movement that's gripping the West. Canada actually can be heavily blamed for that thing getting off the ground, because Pierre Elliott Trudeau had a lot to do with getting it off the ground. As a matter of fact, Pierre Elliott Trudeau's environmental program was a lot of that. But here's this idea that we have abundant energy, we have abundant ability to produce energy. This is a huge issue in Canada, so this is all very practical. And but because climate change or whatever excuse that they name, we need to cut back, we need to artificially limit how much energy we produce, how much energy we use, how much stuff we have, in order to satisfy. So now you have less stuff, no air conditioning, discomfort. I mean, when I say discomfort, that's cute. Thousands of people in Europe died in that heat wave. Thousands of people died in that heat wave from heat stress and heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Okay, so this is this is actually can be life and death, and it can be worse in the winter, because cold kills more than heat. But we're going to reduce, but we get to feel better about ourselves because we're environmentally friendly and green and sustainable and all this. Sustainable is the magic, sensible word. Oh, we're all sustainable. Can you get a green star on our jacket or something? But this is not going to transform. So quantity enough transformed into quality, not enough, but you can feel good about it, and it does not transform back, right? And this is why being grateful to the stuff, to me, being grateful for the stuff that we have and not desiring this qualitative change can allow us to recognize the foundations of why we have that stuff and to stand and defend. Like, I'm grateful that I have, like, I don't have brownouts at my house and have to go 4 hours a day without electricity. And so how is that done? Well, we have to have enough power plants. Like, okay, I want those, right? I would like that to continue. And I feel like there's a curiosity about the foundations of what we have that comes with that sense of gratitude. Again, this isn't that complacent kind of thing where you're like, oh, well, whatever I have, I'm grateful for that. So if I have a really bad situation, I'll just be grateful for that and not want something, fundamentally better. But this is all based on literally magical thinking baked into communism.
And so that's one of the big
us.
questions that's one of the big questions that I want to ask you. There's like at least 3 or 4 topics, but I thought that we would start with sort of exactly on that. How do you see the current fight against cultural Marxism? How do you see our battle with CRT, DEI, all of these kinds of like woke forces in society right now? And I'll ask this like generally for the West, because hopefully eventually you've done a lot of commentary recently about Canada, and we'll sort of like hyper focus on that. But some of my friends, some of the people around me, they keep saying, well, like Fauci is currently giving a testimony to Congress, right? Like, did we win from COVID? Have we settled that argument? Is the battle perpetual? How do you see where we are right now?
Um, I do have to kind of, you said the West in general, so it's actually complicated because it is a diverse entity, the West. The Commonwealth is different than the United States. The different countries in the Commonwealth are different from one another. Western Europe is its own set of question marks or answers. And so there is some diversity there. Like, I think the US is fighting the fight pretty well. I do not think Canada is fighting the fight very well. I think that Australia is fighting the fight quite poorly. I think that New Zealand is doing better than Australia and Canada, but is only kind of marginal. But I don't even think the US is fully winning yet. It is winning on the strict identity politics points. Like, we're so sick of it here now, and we have moved on to where it's like the reaction is an eye roll and making fun of it, and this will eventually start to create institutional change. And it's going to have, we're already having lawsuits winning. We've got people like Harmeet Dillon and our Department of Justice that are doing she's suing the pants off of people, but intelligently, with a strategy, with a vision, where she knows where the foundations the legal foundations that have allowed this DEI monstrosity to take over, specifically disparate impact. But in Canada, it's kind of the exact opposite situation still. While some of the population has moved away from it, you know, people are still very strongly enthralled to it. A lot of people are still moving toward it. The institutions seem to be very much more strongly captured. It's much more concerning, in my opinion. And again, across the Commonwealth and Europe, it varies from country to country. I think the U.S. will lead on this, and that most of the Western civilization will end up following. But it's scary for countries like Canada, frankly, in my opinion. That said, we also have what I'm not the only one. I thought I came up with this term, but I will call it, there's a name when two authors think of the same idea independently, but they don't plagiarize from each other, but they have the same idea. But I saw this after I said it. Somebody sent me some stuff from the DSA, and the DSA is actually saying it themselves. But I called it woke 2.0, which is kind of this Hassan Piker, very kind of Palestine oriented, third world oriented, global north south, very material affordability oriented approach to a new woke socialist solution to all of these problems. And I don't think the U.S. I think we're more prepared to fight back against this than we were for the first wave. But I don't think we're actually fully prepared for this shift. The Democratic Party certainly isn't, and is going to get completely like, our Democratic Party is going to become properly as bad as some of the worst European and Commonwealth parties, I think, as a result of this shift. Our Democratic Party might be as bad as NDP or whatever in terms of its ideological outlook in a year or two, which is horrifying for the world, actually, because that's like half of the most powerful country on earth. So big concerns. But the fight is going, right. We didn't just lose. We didn't just transform. Again, there's this weird issue. Like in Canada, it's like Mark Carney didn't really campaign against Pierre Poilievre at all. He campaigned against Donald Trump, and then he won because of that, right? And there's this weird like anti-Trump thing in Canada that's metastasized into an anti-American thing that's going to prevent Canada from kind of following in this direction, even though it desperately needs to. And it's a little silly, but it's actually gross. Like, when I was in Toronto a couple months ago, I was talking to some Americans who have lived there for a decade, right? And they're telling me like, yeah, I work as a server, and I'll get a table, and like the patrons will say, I need to talk to the manager. I won't have an American serve me. I won't give my money to an American or whatever. And it's like, what? Like, you guys are idiots.
Yeah, totally disgusting.
Yeah, it's
huge here.
Yeah, it's
we
like
hear it all
I
the
felt
time.
it. I
as
it was
much
like
as you
palpable.
hear, as much as you hear the anecdotes, I think live that every day. Everyone we know, especially the older generations in Canada, 60 plus in particular, are they are insanely anti-Trump, and it's all they talk about. I think that's the only thing that they think is wrong his country and with the world. They don't see any of the actions of Mark Carney as being fallible in any way. It's just, oh, if only Trump hadn't done this, then we would be fine. And they don't look at Justin Trudeau's track record of the last 10 years. Anything he's done, it's all about Trump. At the same time, I wanted to get more into this Democratic Socialists of America, because you've been talking about how it poses this threat to the Democratic Party in general, and in Canada right now, I don't think there's any sort of similar communist type party that is as popular, but I'm not sure how much attention you were paying when our federal New Democratic Party, they lost official party status after Justin Trudeau was out and Mark Carney came in. But they did have a leadership convention this year. They've elected a new leader, Avi Lewis. And when he did his victory speech on stage, there were Palestine flags waving in the background. The whole convention, they had this equity card system where speakers were given priority with colored cards, whether they were like disabled or trans or whatever their skin color was. And so this is a guy, he's never held elected office. And he's gone on the record multiple times praising New York Mayor Mamdani. Just loves the guy. So we don't have the same sort of populist movement behind that right now, but I think it's a threat in Canada too. And I'm curious, like, how do you think that these, if it's such a threat in America, do you think this is going to be on the radar for Canada too?
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of stuff spreads. The success of Mandami has really partially, like, they had a movement to do this, but then it sort of unleashed, this belief that it can work. And now you have several other, people who've won primaries in New York. You've got them in Colorado. You've got them. I think there's some that have won in California, or maybe it's just their primary system's different. So I know, like, that lady in Los Angeles that replaced Spencer Pratt in suspicious enough conditions in their election, for their primary election for mayor, is kind of aligned with this. So you're going to see a lot of it, and they're on the move, and they're gaining a lot of energy. And in America, that energy is kind of centered on the fact that, if just to use the terms woke one and woke two, woke one has become, again, very unpopular. It's a little different in Canada because woke one is still very popular. So I don't know what'll happen if there's a qualitative shift in how they approach the issue. But affordability is a major issue in Canada. The Palestinian thing is a major issue in Canada. So I have a feeling it's going to be a slightly different form, but a very similar energy is going to build there. And the further left parties are going to see it as an opportunity to be able to rise. Another difference in Canada, though, is, so, like, there's a whole, like, there's literally a whole, like, world of philosophy that basically nobody's ever heard of, that we've all been dealing with since, like, the 1960s. It's called mondialism. We would call it globalism, but then you sound like a conspiracy theorist. But it's actually, like, mondial means one world in this context. So it comes from the French word monde, which means world. And so it is like the when Americans talk about the so-called uniparty, it's the mondialists. When they talk about the rhino Republicans, it is the the right wing of the mondialist movement. And basically Canada, like, what Trudeau and the Liberal Party and Carney represent is this mondialism. They're in effect like globalists. They're World Economic Forum aligned, they're United Nations aligned. And this is why they hate Trump, by the way, because Trump is like the first Western politician in generations to just buck this whole system, and everybody's freaking out because all of a sudden it's like he popped the bubble on it. It was just, what sensible Western politics looks like, until Trump came along and was like, nah. And now the whole world's in, like, disarray as a result of the fact that he popped a bubble and kind of exposed that there was this thing going on. So the point that I'm trying to make, though, is that in the United States, the Democrats have represented this very kind of mondialist position very strongly for the last several years, and woke one deeply infected them. The same thing has happened in Canada. The Liberal Party represented it, and woke one deeply infected it. I mean, to the point of, like, total infection, it looks like, in Canada, but also in the Democrats in the U.S. Like, you have John Fetterman is, like, the only example of somebody saying stuff that's kind of off the script or whatever, of woke. And then you have this new thing. And I think in the US, my point was, is that I think in the US, the failure of the Democrats to win in 24 and to even mount a viable candidate is like indicative of them seeing like this is our movement to spring. But in Canada, you have a different situation, which is that the Liberals are still very strong. And therefore, what you'll see is more like an infusion. You'll see like a turning of the direction of the parties rather than like what appears to be a attempted coup in the United States of the Democratic Party. And that's because all of those forces I just talked about, the woke has been more successful in Canada. The mondialists are much stronger. They're much weaker in the United States. And it's hard to mount a coup against something that's really strong and popular and that's already doing most of your bidding. So I don't know that it will be as direct a threat, but it'll be like more a shift in the culture than this kind of radical immediate departure. But to do a radical immediate departure in the US, like the DSA is doing, requires that you distinguish yourself clearly from the thing you're up against. So that's why I think it's going to be so much more vocally, rabidly, openly communist as compared to the parallel version in Canada will probably be sneakier and less easy to identify for the communism that they embody, and will start to infuse into the left wing politics there.
Do you think that that's? I mean, that makes me much more concerned.
Yeah.
Like that kind of subversive, insidious. Like when I'm keeping tabs on what's going on with Saeed in Michigan, and it seems like he's going to win the primary for senator in Michigan resoundingly. But from what I've seen, at least so far, I hope and pray that he's going to lose dramatically in the general. And so, do you think, because to be honest with you, my history of communism, Marxism, and the rise is not as strong as it should be. They say, and it has succeeded in the past, that you have these like huge shifts, pretty sudden, all at once, versus something more insidious. I just wonder if the appetite in Canada and in the US is more palatable to something that's sudden, like a resurgence of the NDP, saying that the Liberals are not going far enough, something along those lines in Canada versus the DSA in the US? Or do you think that this is going to be something that is a lot more insidious? And the big reason that I ask is because if they are switching more towards an economic lens rather than vulnerable members of society or whatever, and we are reverting back to the 2006, 2007 Occupy Wall Street type picture, it seems like nobody is on board with that. Like, not the elites, not the establishment that is against their own interests. Ideally, hopefully, not the Republicans, because this is a violation of all of the things that they hold sacred. Not the Conservatives in Canada. So, like, who's left today to sort of go down that economic path towards a true Marxism? If that makes sense.
Can I interject before you answer?
You might know the answer.
Well, I'm also curious if you're surprised that there's this new poll. I think it was an Angus Reid poll out of Canada. 47% of people aged 18 to 29 said that a strong leader who does not have to bother with parliament and elections would be a good way of governing this country. That's what the youth are feeling in this country right now.
That's alarming.
It's incredibly alarming.
Actually,
so I wonder what you make of that.
I mean, what I make of it is that they do not feel like that the system that you have is able to produce the outcomes that they want. And therefore, that's almost always when you start seeing people clamor for a stronger leader, an anti-democratic leader. It's interesting because, you brought up the idea of the history of, communism and so on. But the fact is that this is they're not going to like hearing this, but I'm just going to be blunt. This is much more Mein Kampf than it is What Is to Be Done or the State and Revolution. So this is a much more fascistic approach. I mean, Hitler spent chapters of Mein Kampf discussing why parliaments are fundamentally weak and they can't do what they need to do. And what you actually need is the decision power of a leader, where the communists actually hid their agenda. They, of course, they had the dictatorship of the proletariat, which was run by the Communist Party, which was run by the communist leaders, but they hid that very heavily in this concept that, there was the party Congress that was actually doing the thing. In fact, the party Congress created the Politburo, and like the dictators were on paper subservient to that. So the communists actually organized it to where the thing that looks like a parliament was actually the real object, and all of these guys, so they looked more democratic. Whereas the fascists were like, nope, it was called the Führer principle, actually, the leader principle. And so what you would have is this hierarchical structure where, leaders have subordinates. They were called Unterführers, and the Unterführer would answer to his Führer, his direct leader, or his Überführer, who would then, give him orders. And there was a total subservience in the downward direction, and a total responsibility. Actually, it's the other way: total subservience in the upward direction, and total responsibility in the downward direction. So if your underlings went and screwed up, you could be held responsible for it. And so this idea of an unaccountable leader, or a unbound executive, as other Nazi philosophers of jurisprudence wrote about it, is far more in line with fascist thinking than it is with communist thinking. But the reason is because they don't think that the government that they have is successfully doing the bidding that it's not doing the things they want done fast enough. The irony is if they get what they want, or think they want, which is an unaccountable leader, that works as long as that leader continues to share the same ambitions as them. And history has shown that that's never, not for
Right.
long, right? For a year or two, they might come in and punish all their enemies and enact all the policies they think they want. And then the paranoia sets in, and the purge culture sets in, and the destruction of political enemies and suppression set in. And so, like, this is massive historical illiteracy, but it's also, like I said, they think they know the answer to society, and it's not happening fast enough, and therefore you need a strong man to come in and set it. And if I had to guess, in Canada, what a lot of them are feeling, I don't know, with the young people, where they feel on Trump, because you said it was the old people, but it's like they want their anti-Trump that's gonna enact whatever lunatic policies that they're in favor of. And I give it 18 months if they get what they want before they really regret getting what they want, because that's usually about the timeline. If you look at all of these things, even like you look at the constitutions of things like the Soviet Union and Mao's People's Republic of China, they have to rewrite them every 5 years. It's like it doesn't work. It doesn't last. So even that's with the things being just loaded with lies. As for this insidious thing, I think look at these elections. If what you just predicted in Michigan is what happens, that this guy wins the primary decisively and gets crushed in the general, then you're going to see that this is going to take a much more insidious form, because they will have proven in electoral politics that it's not viable, at least not yet. And so the insidious model is what you go back to when that's the case. If it succeeds, however, they're going to go for broke. Probably in both countries. I still think that Canada will present a more insidious model, a more subversive model than America will. But if the DSA guys get crushed, broadly speaking, in the general, if Mondami was sort of a confluence of forces and largely a fluke, then, it wasn't. It's a coordinated strategy, taking advantage of what these guys call commie corridors, which is the only place they're trying to put up candidates right now where they have actually a decent chance of winning. But if they fail, then you're going to watch them go to an infiltration method far more than a direct appeal to democracy method. But yeah, poor Canadians, young people. It's not. I mean, American young people, especially on the right wing, have that attitude as well. By the way, the sympathy for they call it a commissar. Well, they don't call it that. The historical term for it is a commissarial dictator. The sympathy for a dictator who can step outside of the constitutional order in order to defend it, allegedly, is very, very high. Almost nobody wants a sovereign dictator who can just like run amok. But the problem is once you get the one, you can't stop him from becoming the other, because it becomes an emergency to tell him that he has to stop being a dictator.
So this brings me to
here. Oh,
this,
sorry,
this
Eric,
brings me to things. One of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about was sort of like the right and its proclivities lately, specifically talking about your concept of the woke right, which I think is brilliant. And I think you've been totally vindicated on it. I mean, like, anybody can look all over Twitter and see the breakdown in a lot of right-wing cultural influence to see that is the case. One of the things that I wonder about is to your point about quote unquote strongmen. There has always been a lot of appreciation on the right for things like that. I mean, the right has notoriously been a lot more sympathetic to people like Putin, for example. Obviously, they voted in Trump. They like those kinds of things. But to your point about the populists getting what they want, whether it's on the right or the left. The truth of the matter is that the last 20 years, outside of a few spells here and there, things have gotten worse. The disparities are getting worse. Opportunities for young people are far fewer, and so on. So, like, on the one hand, it's kind of like they are justified. They have some thoughts that are like, someone has to be able to give us and deliver more than what the elite and institutions establishments have. So on the one hand, we go with something more fascistic. On the other hand, we go with something more communist, but something else has to happen. So tell us a little bit about the woke right and where you see conservatives landing on this current battlefield.
Well, I mean, the woke right is taking a major beating in the United States now. It's kind of exposed itself. It sort of went too far.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it took up causes that it absolutely shouldn't have. You could say, like Tucker Carlson, for example, went too far by interviewing Nick Fuentes. Um,
That was a
okay,
turning point.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, that is a too far argument. Candace Owens, for example, though, has not gone too far. She's literally like she is gone like bananas, right? She's taken up causes like claiming that Charlie Kirk's widow had something to do with his murder, that are extraordinarily upsetting to large numbers of people. And she seems to be making, I mean, just raking in money over it, and it all looks very cynical and bad, to where like the best explanations are that she's making millions of dollars off of something horrifying, and the worst explanations are that there's deep complicity or this is an operation that she's a part of. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing good, and this has really really injured them. Plus they've started to just go for broke and say things like that they intend to push us into having another democratic president in 2028, so that we will radicalize and have, like they say openly, that so that we will have a dictator in 2032. I mean, Nick Fuentes has made this point repeatedly, and this has actually like gotten out enough to where it's actually scared people because they can see that it's a potential reality. So they're not doing very well now. Their exposure has caused them to decide to. It's like, I'm trying to think of a way to not put this quite so colorfully, but it's like you have like an exhibitionist who showed a little bit too much and he got called out for it. So he just opens his coat all the way. It's sort of like the metaphor. And it's like, all right, like didn't expect you to do that, right? I didn't expect you, it's like an airplane that gets detected on radar so that they just drive it into the ground. Like I just can't quite figure out why they're doing it the way they're doing it. And it's not actually gone well. It feels like it's become a organic mass movement to oppose them at this point. So that's not going particularly well. But they have been quite radical, and you're right that they have legitimate grievances to a degree. But this is where I come back to our spiritual malady is ingratitude. Like you said, it's legitimately harder than sometimes in the past. Well, in particular, when it's legitimately harder than most of their own parents' lives in some ways, and maybe some of their grandparents' lives, but not before that, because
Mm-hmm.
before that's World War II, and before that's the Great Depression, and before that's World War One, and before that, like we don't have to go very far back, and like we don't know how. Actually, before that, we don't know how to cure strep throat, and so like basic bacterial diseases are wiping people out, like. The rule, I mean, there have been mass famines. You're talking about like the Black Death was killing like 30% of the population. I mean, I get it. Things are tough in ways that didn't exist for this current generation's parents. But if you take a broader historical view, the reality is that life is frequently hard. And it turns out that maybe in this post-war boom, part of the boomers and then a lot of Gen X had kind of like affluence and peace bubble that's a strong historical abnormality. And there's this perception of downward mobility that therefore kind of radicalized. We need to change so we can be greater off than our parents were. But that might actually be just an unrealistic assumption given the circumstances. But that said, there's also a deeper lack of gratitude for what we do have, like freedom. Like these
Mm-hmm.
Canadians that want to have a dictator are not grateful for the things that they're able to do because they can't conceive of what they won't be able to do when they've lost it. They're not grateful for the opportunities. Like I was looking into this. I tried to dig into this. The Gen Z has all these problems. Everything's so expensive. Okay, so like I spent like days digging into this a few weeks ago. I don't remember all the details, but it's like, okay, what about house ownership, buying? They're never going to be able to buy a house because they're saddled with student debt. Okay, their student debt's way up. That's actually a point of fact. And house costs, at least in the United States, on median, but this isn't the same. Like starter homes are not median homes. There's some
Mm-hmm.
expectation problems here, and also a lot of homes aren't in cities. So there's some expectation problems here. And I've actually heard people say that their primary objective in finding a place to live is that they are able to go to the bar, get drunk, and walk home with a hookup. And that's they can't afford that apartment. I'm like, screw you. Like,
Oh
Mm-hmm.
okay,
my
so what,
God.
right? So there's some expectation problems boiling around in here. DoorDash is obviously like a famous point of reference on that. Um, I've still never ordered DoorDash because I think it's a waste of money qualitatively. Like I will walk before I pay $29 for like a sandwich or something. Um, so there's some again expectation gap, but then there's this other thing. Okay, so like I said, student loans are a real issue financially. Houses median cost is about 5 times median salary right now, as opposed to for my generation, they were about 3 times median salary, which was stable for some generations backwards before that. So there is an increase in house cost that's not quite double, but it's up by 2/3. That's significant, right? So there are some affordability challenges. But on the other hand of this, so we can acknowledge that those are part. I mean, you're not in a Great Depression. I mean, you're literally not wondering if you need to boil your shoes. You're not trying to find a carpetbagger to do something illegal under the table with. So, there's a lot of things that aren't as bad as it's always been, or you've been in the past too. But then the median wages are actually adjusted for inflation higher by a significant portion than, say, the boomer generation. The economic opportunity set is so much wider that they don't know how to quantify it. You can pull out your phone, which is on airplane mode, and you can pull out your phone and come up with like 10 possible money making pathways by the end of the day if you're actually really creative and a real hustler. Whereas, like, if you grew up in a small town in the United States a few years ago, your only employment opportunity was like the movie theater, and like that's it. And it's like
Yes.
or you're mowing some dude's yard and hoping he's not mowing it himself, right? And so the prospects are much, much, much broader. And so again, like I'm saying, life is sometimes easier, and maybe it wasn't fair that the boomers and Gen X had some advantages here. And sometimes it's harder, and sometimes it's easier in some ways and harder in others. But we all can be grateful for the things that we have, work with the things that we have. And so what I think about a lot is, look, you're given a choice here. The world is the way that it is. I'm not saying that it's perfect or that you should just accept it and say that we shouldn't try to change things, but you kind of have two choices, which is to work the hardest that you can within the system and try to, by your own actions, be not just an example, but part of the solution that pulls us out of these uh, tough situations. Or you can be somebody who decides you want a revolution, and kind of a couple of things happen. Either we don't get the revolution and the people who work hard come out ahead. They're probably employing the people who wanted a revolution, if they're even employable, 10 years from now. Or you do get a revolution and everybody loses. And so it's like, I struggle with this argument that excuse me, that this relative perception of downward mobility justifies burning down the whole system that you're no longer grateful for because your prospects show that you're going to be 15% less successful than your parents, which is already astronomically successful against the history of mankind. It's like I
Right.
can't get my head around it when I tried to find out how bad is it for Gen Z? Is it justified that they need to go like, full Boston Tea Party here? And the answer, and it's not Boston Tea Party though, because it's Bolsheviks, or Jacobins or whatever. And the answer is that wouldn't be justified anyway. But even under the circumstances, it's like you're not grateful for the opportunities that you have, and you're therefore not capitalizing on them.
Maybe this is where a bit of difference comes in between the US and Canada too, because in Canada, our real estate, especially in big cities, is a bit more expensive relative to some places in the US when you compare it
Mhm.
to wages. And then we've always felt elitist in Canada about our public healthcare system. But now what we're seeing is it's on the brink of collapse. It's falling apart. ERs are shutting down. People are waiting on average 14 hours to be seen in the ER. People are sometimes dying in ERs or leaving and then dying. And so this sort of elitist, well, at least we're not America and we have this and we pay our taxes and it's more expensive to live here, but this is what we get out of it. We're not getting that anymore. So I think there's this additional layer of resentment that some Canadians have that makes it harder, possibly, for some Canadians to feel gratitude towards the system. And, going back to the age thing, like it is the 60 plus voters that are propping up the Liberal Party right now. If you look at all of the other age stratifications, it's 1% to 2% difference in who they support as a party to lead the country. But 60 plus, it's like a 25-30% difference, and they prefer the Liberals. And it's like, this is the sort of boomer generation that lived in this greatest time where they had the most amount of disposable income. They had the greatest buying power. Their real estate was the cheapest. And we're not seeing that anymore. And we're seeing the young people in Canada are becoming more and more conservative.
Right. Well,
So
I think the variable there might be right, but it's actually probably misplaced, because when you started saying 60, I started doing, 60 plus, I started doing the math on when they were born. So, okay, they were born in 66 or later, or 66 or earlier. So these are people that grew up in what was literally called Trudeau mania, which is exactly that thing that I was talking about that Pierre Elliott Trudeau brought in. What we have with the boomer, it's like a lot of people are mad at the boomers. And I feel like this is a misplaced anger because, and not to make it partisan, but the fact is, the problem is that there's a very large number of something called the boomer left. And in America, the boomer left is like, I think, the strongest set of people that are supporting like transition and all of the trans related stuff. If I go to an event and there's going to be a protest because it's about trans stuff, like more than half of the protesters will be grandparents. But this boomer left phenomenon, these are like your hippies and so on that grew up in this massive shift in the 60s. Now, it doesn't solve the problem, right? But again, I think we should try to diagnose the problem as accurately as possible. And I do get that. Like, I think they're actually, like, I'm going to say something I probably not allowed to say in Canada. Like, I think Canada does need a fundamental political revolution. And I actually think what it needs is an American style constitution. I think you
Of
need
course.
like a full
Like,
blown defense of free speech, a full blown
yeah,
yeah,
defense of
exactly.
a lot of, all of your fundamental individual rights. And
Yeah.
honestly, not to agree with Hitler, although it does, the parliamentary
Clip
system
that.
doesn't work. Right?
Yeah. No,
Parliamentary
that's fair.
systems are no good. So when I read the chapter of Mein Kampf where Hitler diagnoses the problem with the parliamentary system, which is his chapter where he talks about his time in Vienna, so it's chapter 3, I think, in Mein Kampf. He's talking about its fundamental weakness. He has some really funny lines in there, like easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for an election to pick an honest man. Like, it's pretty funny. But he also goes through this talk about how in a parliament, everything ends up being decided by committee. Therefore, nobody's ever responsible for any decision ever made. It's always the rest of the parliament. It wasn't me. And since there's no responsibility, there's no accountability. Now, his solution to that, let me say the thing I was going to say first. When I was reading that, I thought, thank God I'm an American, right? So I'm thinking of all my friends that live in parliamentary systems, parliamentary countries. I've dealt with Canadians, with New Zealanders, Kiwis, I guess, Brits, and some of the European countries, and then the European Union overall. And what he is arguing there is correct. Okay. It's like this no responsibility ever, but his solution is terrible, right? So he's right on the narrow point and wrong on the broad point. His broad point was like, what you need is decision making. You need a dictator, and that's what 47% of young Canadians apparently have decided. But the American system actually has a vent for that. We do have a chief executive who's not part of the parliament, not subject to the parliamentary program. We don't have a prime minister. We have a president. And the president is a fundamentally separate branch of government from the legislature, which is the only parliamentary part we have. Then we have a separate court that is, entirely. We have three, competing co-equal branches of government. You can read if you're a fun Canadian and you want to know your American root here. It is Federalist 51, where they argue about the necessity for this kind of a structure. So I'm reading Hitler criticizing parliaments and thinking he's polemical. He's he's too much, but he's got some serious solid points here, right? And thank God I'm an American, where we actually do have a decision-making executive who can be blamed for the price of gas, even if it's not fair. who can then be held to account in the next election or through public opinion or whatever other pressures can be put on him. But we also, separate that from a parliamentary style legislature with two houses and blah, 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 blah. Canada could stand to not rely on I don't know a ton about your system, but it's purely parliamentary. You have a prime minister and your upper chamber is sort of fake
Exactly.
in my
Yeah,
estimation.
that's exactly it. So let me ask you, James, because you were saying on this, one of the key differences here that you're saying is that, so like I get into the conversation with my friends, my colleagues very often, where people get complained that government is not able to do enough, and I always tell them, but if society is working well in general, you don't want government to do much. You want government to be able to sit there and do nothing that isn't built by a resounding consensus. So, on the one hand, I agree with you that there is a problem where people cannot address specific issues in society, but an executive branch is supposed to be the panacea to that. To your point about what's different between Canada and the US, you guys, your executive, who can weigh in and do these kinds of things with immediacy, they are elected and they are accountable. And the Supreme Court decision, I cannot remember for the life of me, year and a half, 2 years ago, that finally cemented the fact that the administrative state does not exist. There is no other branch of government in the US. In Canada, we have very much the opposite. And that's the big problem, is that we have the Faucis of Canada out there acting as dictators, being able to influence massive swaths of Canadian society with no release valve, with no consensus.
Right. No, I agree with that. And I mean, it's not that it gives you something you can immediately do about it, but I've been thinking a lot in the past 2 years about government as the kind of executor of societal things. Like, it's kind of famously Ketanji Brown Jackson, our DEI hire on the Supreme Court that Biden put on there, like famously remarked at one point a year or so ago that the Constitution was limiting the power of the government, and to which I think, Clarence Thomas replied, that's literally why it exists. That's what it's for, right? And thank you for finally.
How is that
understanding
not a
point.
meme, by the way?
It
that
is
should be
sort
like the
of,
greatest.
It was a
meme.
meme.
Okay.
Like she skipped so many
I
memes.
missed that.
Pick.
Yeah. So
that.
I think a lot about the different incentive structures. I mean, looking at what's going on in California, I'm reflecting on one of President Trump's statements, which is not verified, but is probably true. And I've talked to some people who work inside the U.S. government at high levels, who have said that it's probably more than true, that President Trump was being kind of conservative in his estimate. But President Trump said that if the American government were to eliminate 50% of the outgoing money that is only the monies that are going to frauds, outright criminal enterprises, that no reasonable person in the right mind would agree that money from the government, taxpayer money, should be going to fraud. And he limited it to this specifically. And he said that if we were to eliminate 50% of the money outgoing from the U.S. federal government going to frauds, that it would balance the U.S. budget. The balancing of the budget, it's not about cutting programs. It's about cutting actual grift and fraud. And I started thinking about this in light of some of the other stuff. And it's government literally lacks any kinds of legitimate incentives to lower its costs, to police fraud. The only thing that it can possibly do are audits. They resist doing them with extraordinary force. And so I think that the thing that has to be done, especially, maybe for Canadians, because these numbers, is to start to realize that government, as Ronald Reagan famously said, government is not part of the solution. Government is part of the problem. Is that it's not that government can or cannot do these things. It's not that it does or does not enact the will of the people. Those are their own issues. It is that when government enacts even the will of the people, it doesn't have the correct incentive structures or mechanisms to prevent massive amounts of waste, fraud, and just insanely inefficient uses of resources. And that's when it's doing what you want it to do. I mean, 100 times to 1. Even Mondami, they all like Mondami, right? Mondami is, I'm going to make these government grocery stores. And now what is he out saying? Well, they're not going to have hot food, and they're not going to have salad bars, and they're not going to have all these other things people like. And they're going to take 2 years longer than we said. And they're going to, sell groceries for 30% less than their competitors, using taxpayer money to undercut their, literally the guy running a grocery store pays taxes so that his competitor in the state-run grocery store can undercut him. There's something like really fundamentally weird or maybe illegal about that. Okay, but it's going to take all this. They're not going to have what you want. They're going to take 2 years longer, and it's going to cost like several times what we said it was originally going to cost in order to do it. But hey, it's going to be great. And it's like you just look at the staggering inefficiency there, and you're like, well, where's that money going? Like a private enterprise could open up a grocery store in a month, get it stocked, get it moving for a fraction of the cost with the hot bar and all the things people want. And if it sucks and it fails, it just fails. Nothing props it. Why in the world? Where's the money going? And the answer turns out to be that when because of this lack of accountability, people are people. Even like the guy in the government has a friend, and his friend has a business to fulfill this bull crap, who works 10% as well as he should and still gets paid because his friend in the government made it happen. This kind of level of corruption and fraud is insane. Look at the California rail system that doesn't exist, however many hundred billions of dollars that was. Where did that money go? You start thinking about it, and it's like, okay, how do you, again, look at Mandami. Total resistance against an internal audit of his government. It's already run out of money, but he won't allow there to be an audit. A friend of mine got on a school board in the United States, a very big school board with $1 billion plus year budget. And immediately she was like, I want an audit of where all of our money's going. We're spending over $1 billion a year of taxpayer money. Where's it going? And they resisted her. It took her 7 years to get a single audit approved and done, and it required political trickery to get it done in the first place. And then they pulled it out, delayed it and delayed it and delayed it to the maximum extent of the law. If you do that in a private company, besides the fact that oversight is going to be on you the next morning, suspecting criminal activity, besides even the government enforcement part, you're just going to go under. Like you're going to collapse.
There's this adage that I love that show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah, that comes from Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's trading partner.
I would love to be able to, at one point, go and, because I've shopped in Cuban grocery stores back in, I think, around 2009, 2010. I would love to one day go and shop in one of Mamdani's grocery stores and sort of compare the experiences and write about that.
You probably won't get the chance because they probably will take 4 to 5 or 6 years to come into existence.
Maybe in many years. Yeah, it's wild. And, talking about this week as a little anecdote about this whole idea, I'm appearing in court this week because I have an ongoing free speech battle. And one of the groups that's appearing, so this week is about groups that are trying to become interveners in the free speech case. One of them is called eGale. It's a government funded, every year they get $4 million from the government of Canada. And they say that they have a public interest in the outcome of my free speech case. And, what I saw yesterday is they're sort of going viral online because Tim Hortons is this Canadian coffee donut brand that just did a corporate sponsorship partnership with Harry Potter. And so they have these Harry Potter themed donuts. And eGale Canada, that's getting these millions of dollars from the Canadian government, is in a conniption about it. And this is what our tax dollars are going to. They're saying, like, don't you dare go and buy these transphobic donuts, essentially. And I'm like,
I think this is exactly what's everything wrong with Canada. Exactly, because that's what I was going to say. So first off, why is our money going there? Probably because it's somebody's friend or friend of a friend or something along those lines, much to your point. And then, so like, it's totally abuse of that. And then the second thing is, like, even what they are out there doing is counterproductive to the wellness of society. So, I mean, like, taxpayers are funding their own demise. Something's like so tremendously offensive about that.
Yeah, well, that's what not that everybody loves it, or even here in the States, or how it operated, but this Doge thing that Elon Musk helped set up, Department of Government Efficiency, and of course he has to make it into some kind of juvenile joke, and I'm not a huge fan of the guy, honestly. I think some of the stuff's cool and some of the stuff's not, but as a person, I'm not a huge fan. I think he's puerile and vindictive and some other things. So I'm not like a stan, but he creates this Doge, and Doge ends up discovering that USAID is this program in the federal government that's basically doing that. It's like giving these insane grants to not just like stupid things, and who's to say what's stupid? sometimes anybody, every reasonable person can decide that some of these programs were pretty dumb and wasteful of taxpayer money. But on the other hand, to actually, like you said, the NGOs, the nonprofit organizations were getting these huge grants, and they're the specific ones that are doing these kinds of activities in the public interest that are actually, and as you said, funding our own demise. And you can actually see one of the things I just saw today, I think, or yesterday, I think it's today, is that like the amount of money that the Democratic Party is like bringing in this year is anomalously low, like
Exactly.
really
Yeah.
low. And it's
Yeah.
like, how much of that was getting funded through, how much of it was taxpayer money that was getting funded through USAID programs to
They
go
had to
to
mortgage their
whatever it went
building,
to?
right? Like that to refinance their the Democrat headquarters in order to get a
Yeah.
loan, in order to pay back things that they owed, and to fund campaigns for like Saeed and whoever else. Like absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's totally bonkers. So like this is actually the nature of how that stuff works. There was a story I was paying attention to. Got reminded of it yesterday, where in the previous election in 24, where somebody keyed me into this thing that was going on in hospitals in Michigan, where there's this concept in the woke academic literature that's called the social determinants of health. A lot of people have heard of this. So
Foundational
there's
to
We're
my
in
some
education.
healthcare.
Like
yeah, some
it's all we
sociological
hear about.
determinant.
Healthcare.
And
Yeah.
so there's this entire line of literature you can go look up for yourself. There's more than one paper. There's lots of papers written about voting as a social determinant of health. And so what this paper does is then justifies a nonprofit, that the nonprofit's job is to get huge grants from the government, and then which are approved by Democrats in the states. And then this nonprofit takes those grant dollars and they go into hospitals and they take people that are mentally incapable of voting for themselves, and in the name of helping them recover, they help them vote and fill out their ballots for them and get them to sign the ballots. And it's like, okay. And then I was reminded of that because there was another program that I forgot what the program is now. I just saw it like 2 days ago, but I even said something on X about it. It's like, you should go look into whether or not whatever it is, addictions, it was addiction counseling or whatever. I bet you voting as a social determinant of health is involved somehow in getting people off of their addictions because they feel greater agency in their society, or some BS argument. So some nonprofit that's then funded by the Democrats exists to take taxpayer money to go get crackheads and give them ballots so that they can get off of crack by voting for Democrats who approve this like money wheel. And it's like, I almost want to like almost grab people and shake them at this point who think like government is a solution. The more examples of this I see, I'm just flabbergasted at the fact that this isn't like an anomaly. This is business as usual. And these are literally like mafia style rackets that are being run, that effectively run the electoral politics of entire states with gigantic multi-billion dollar budgets of taxpayer money. They're not just being wasted, they're being misdirected into the continuance of a program that's cutting society to pieces. And so it's like I almost want to shake people like, government, it can't do the right thing. It's not whether or not you shouldn't empower it to do anything more than the bare minimum, because it cannot do the right thing because all the incentives are wrong everywhere.
So if I
Anyway.
could sum sort of the thesis to the sort of the conversation, because we started with gratitude and we ended it on grift, and so it seems like currently we should spend a lot more time focusing our gratitude on the amount of prosperity that we do have in the West, and attending a lot more to the risks of our freedoms.
Yeah, I mean, well, think about it. Look, I can tie this bow. Not hard. If you have something that you're grateful that you have, you will defend it because you're grateful that you have it, right? So if you start with gratitude and you look at your tough situation and you think, well, what am I grateful that I do have, and what can I do with it? And you try to build with that. And then when first of all, you just become more productive, and you actually become more mentally healthy, and you become happier, which are all kind of like things working together. You're even in a bad situation, you're making better of a bad situation. Maybe there is no best, but you're making better of it. But then when you start to like okay, I'm getting somewhere, I'm making some, and like I have to pay my taxes. Okay, that's fine. Taxes are part of the deal. Like I think they're pretty high. I don't like them or whatever. Where are my tax dollars going? And you start to realize, like, I'm grateful for what I can bring to the table. I'm grateful for what I can bring to my family. I work hard to be able to have this. I'm grateful for the whatever talents and opportunity to do it. And then it's going to fund that. Like, no,
Yeah.
it's not. And then you're making phone calls, then you're litigating, and then like the kind of whole thing. And so it's like the process of renewal that is actually a process of renewal and not a process of revolution, comes from this gratitude. And I'm worried for Canada, but I still think we do have to, even if it sucks, and even if it's a hard time, and even if there are these horrible, like, you guys are on the freaking brink, man, but there's still a ton of blessings to count. And I think that even if it's really bad, all the good next steps come from starting by counting the blessings you have.
I love that. It is actually a moment of levity. We often like to end the show with a moment of levity, and I think that's a great conclusion. So I'm so grateful,
Well,
James,
no,
for you
wait.
coming on.
Eris,
Oh.
we actually do have another moment of levity, though.
I can provide
Oh,
that.
great.
We do. So, that's great, too.
Okay, what do we have on the docket for our moment of levity?
This is great because everybody knows Sophie Cunningham. She's a
Oh, yeah.
WNBA player. And look at this video that played. So these are young girls that are. I'll let Mark play. Young girls are seeing Sophie Cunningham walk into the gym. Look at their fingers.
I love that. I love her. I was saying the other day that, like,
at those government grifters. She like
whoever
9
thought
feet
that
tall.
I would be so interested in the WNBA, but the authentic drama that's going on there is like absolutely captivating. Look at
I
that.
love it.
Like,
I love it. So
Her
many
su-
reasons,
yeah, it's
including
fantastic.
that they tried to sort of reframe her pointing her finger as like bigoted or racist, and obviously it wasn't.
How we doing? All right. Hey, Sophie,
They tried to struggle her, and she was like, nah.
Yeah. They no
fantastic.
struggle session was had, and now all of these young girls have stood up. They love her. She's an icon, and now she's come out in support of women's sports, of course, and said the men don't belong in women's sports. And it's just like what an absolutely wholesome moment in the culture wars, and I love seeing the youth getting involved and not putting
Much
up
to
with
James's
this
point,
nonsense.
it shows that they're losing, right? Like we are winning the argument. You know, like maybe the battle continues forever, right? We have to remain vigilant and keep on advocating for the rights, freedoms that we love. But I mean, the fact that she was not canceled, that the WNBA didn't suspend her, throw her off a team, that she didn't lose any endorsements that she may or may not have, that her popularity has grown. The same with Sydney Sweeney as a phenomenon, like such important prognostic indicators that society is slowly healing.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I think you're right too. I think that is an indicator of exactly that. And as goes America, so goes everybody else, especially when they put their
Exactly.
elbows down and calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
Save the elbows for the hockey.
James, thank you once again so much for joining us. It's great to talk to you, to hear some of your insights and your thoughts. We thank you as Canadians for your attention to Canada and your advocacy for the Canadian people. I think that actually goes a long way. You're one of the very few academics in this milieu who are really advocating in the West on behalf of Canada. So we're very grateful for that. And we hope that you'll come back and talk to us again.
I'm a big fan of Canada, even though a lot of Canadians are a little uppity right now. So I'd love to see Canada back as Canada, honestly, and strong and funny. Like, God, you guys had great humor for years and years. You were like a centerpiece of some of the best comedy. Just a great country when you get your act together. So I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. We'll put our elbows down and see what we can do.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Like, subscribe, do all those kinds of things, and especially follow Conceptual James on X and check out his website. Thanks again.
Friends, let us consider that acuity is the refined clarity of thought and perception which enables one to discern subtle truths.